to give it a
Beforehand,
spin.
I just not. I don't need to today, but we need to discuss about why Japan started kicking the World War II, and also why Japan failed at the Toshiba nuclear power plant, and also we need to consider for the Sharp failed to make investment, and behind the
Right.
scene we should have how they're going to grasp their own fact or their own truth to start thinking sort of things. So I
Right.
believe
So I
Japan
think that's
has some different, brain circuit for making decision. So
right.
I think we need to discuss about. I want to get your thought for these
Right.
issues. This
Okay.
is this
I
is
think
my yeah.
I think that's a very good and very these are very appropriate questions also in the light of this video and in the light of this series. So let's talk about that after the video. I think let's try to apply that Sharp Toshiba World War II. Let's try to apply that to in the context of this difference in decision making and truth finding.
Okay. So I'll go just what me hunch.
A hunch is a general idea, is without really, it's not knowledge yet, but you have a kind of idea. So basically, if you walk on the street at night and you hear something moving and you hear, then you may have a hunch that, oh, that's probably a dog, even though you haven't seen the dog yet.
Yeah, Freud
They just
said.
pick up whatever they want.
Freud said he is talking about hugging. What this mean? I don't understand well, Freud.
Oh, well, basically, Freud claimed that we can understand adults today by looking at their childhood. So why, for example, if we look at criminals, why do people engage in criminal activities? And Freud said, okay, well, a lot of it can be explained by if they were hugged enough in their childhood. So and you could look for data and see. Okay, so by interviews, for example, from kids, and then look at the data 20 years later and see how these kids evolved into adults, and then say, okay, well, see, we find that 70% of the criminals have not been hugged enough in this sample size. Therefore, we can see that there is a relationship between the two, a correlation between the two, that is statistically significant. Hence, a new philosophical, a new theory is born.
So what does this mean?
But then
You mean the Freud
it
said
means,
hugging and the relationship is criminal of child, right?
right?
So what he wanted to say?
But basically, what Freud was doing was that he was theorizing. He was creating a theory on his own hunch. He had an idea. He said, "Oh, well, maybe it is true that."
And also he's talking about Einstein, right?
Right. So basically, he compares Freud with Einstein, and the way that Freud works is that he creates a theory, and then he says, okay, like not being hugged enough will lead to criminal behavior. That's his theory. Then he finds some data to support that. Say, oh, they do a study. They say, okay, well, let's look at the data we have, and look at the data when they were a child, and look at the data when they grow up, and they see that there is a difference, a statistical difference between group A, who has not been hugged enough, and the group that has been hugged enough, and hence he proves his theory. Now, Einstein works differently. He says, okay, he also makes predictions about the future. He also predicts, like, okay, that he makes a theory about relativity, how light travels through space, but he is not looking for theories to support that. In order to prove his theory, he's going out of his way to prove himself wrong. So not to find support in terms of, okay, we compare state A with state B, and if we see a majority of cases, then my theory must be true. No, he says my theory is always true. And the way that I can, the only way that I can prove this is by trying to falsify it. So trying to challenge yourself, trying to find examples where your theory proof, or where your theory would fail, which is, according to Popper, the way that Popper called it was hard science. But we're now going ahead in the video.
Oh, okay. So one more question is, Einstein said past and future, and now is what he wanted to say.
Oh, Einstein. Well, he was explaining his relativity.
Why he quoted Einstein?
Why he quotes Einstein? Because Einstein uses a different scientific approach from Freud. So Freud has a scientific approach where he looks for data that support his theory, and Einstein he creates a theory and he tries to disprove this theory. So he really challenges his own theory by finding examples of where his theory would fail, and if his theory would fail, he would have to throw it completely overboard and start to theorize again. But that would not be a bad result. That would be an optimal result, because basically by throwing out your theory, you come closer to the truth.
You mean he threw out his own theory and he tried to find...
Right. So what Einstein did is he was taking much more risk than Freud. Einstein was trying to prove his theory wrong, and basically by throwing his own theory overboard. So he was taking a lot of risk by disproving it. Now we can make a parallel, for example, in negotiations. Last Saturday you mentioned, like, oh well, in a negotiation, if it becomes like a little bit tricky, people will not mention it. Because suppose that we come to realize that we have a discrepancy between the intentions of the one side of the table and the other side of the table, then Einstein, maybe Freud would not touch it, and he would look at ways that we can confirm our theory. But Einstein's approach would be, he would look for ways that we can both try to disprove our theory.
Okay, so let's continue, right? Okay, Popper, what he's talking about Santa Claus, right?
Actually, Popper did not talk about Santa Claus. That was an example of Hank.
What is different from the form of two persons? His philosophical, idea.
The difference is that it's not really different. What he did is he's highlighting a very big difference in scientific approach, and that's why he noticed that there are different ways of performing science. There is science where we try to look, observe the reality without prejudice. That's the old way of actually practicing science, observing without prejudice. And in the video he says, okay, well, if we observe the reality without prejudice, like we can look outside and look for swan, and we can find one swan that's white, two swans that are right, three swans that are right. We can theorize, create a theory, say, well, all swan are white. But that basically would be the way, that would be a scientific way. But if you really want to do science in a way that Einstein did it, that's so-called hard science, not a real science, then we should look for swans that have a different color in order to support our theory that all swans are white. Like not trying for more white swan, but trying to find a swan that is yellow or orange or black. And lo and behold, after going around the world, you will stumble upon a swan that is black. And once you find that swan, you actually have to reject your theory, which says that all swans are white.
This is Einstein, right?
That's Einstein.
Yes.
That's the way that Einstein works. So basically, in order to find the truth, we need to test our hypotheses and try to find examples, try to find data that is disproving our theory, instead of trying to find more evidence for things that support our theory. Now, this is also one of this is a side step and maybe a little bit of a political one, but I believe that this is what a lot of politicians are doing when they are coming up with their policies. They're looking for evidence to support their theory, and they're not trying to disprove it. They're not necessarily trying to get closer to the truth, but they're just cherry picking the things that support their theory, and therefore by driving, and that is driving their agenda, and they're not necessarily trying to get closer to the truth.
But what you said, paper is without prejudice, but what's different from Einstein and Freud? It doesn't make sense.
No. Basically, that is the traditional approach. Observe without prejudice. Observe without prejudice. Yeah, but Popper says, well, actually, observe without prejudice is almost impossible because we all have hunches. We all have directions that we are looking when we are trying to describe the reality. It's all based on hunches, and when we are looking for evidence, we are either looking left or right, and that is that is depending on our hunches. So in the classical definition of science, we say, okay, as scientists, we observe objectively. Well, says Popper, that's very unlikely because as human beings, we already have some kind of an idea of what the reality looks like. So in order to exercise science, we will have a tendency to look in the direction where we think that we can find evidence to support or evidence to falsify. He says, okay, objective observation without prejudice is almost impossible. So then he goes on and says, okay, what Freud was doing was looking for evidence to support his theory.
Well, it means misunderstanding the fact leading to the misjudgment, sort of things, he said?
So basically he says, well, in a lot of science, we are kind of theorizing and then look for information that supports our theories, i.e. in the case of Freud. But good scientists, they theorize because they have a hunch, and that's not bad. But then they have to look left, right, and center to find evidence that their theory actually doesn't hold true. So instead of only looking at evidence to support your theory, looking in the same direction, we have to we can actually theorize as Einstein also did. But then Einstein said, okay, I'm going to look in all kinds of directions and finding ways to disprove my theory. And by doing that, getting closer to the truth.
Okay, and
So
you said
it is courageous.
You said the politician cherry picking of information, so try to get the different truth. So this kind of phenomena will going to be happen. So this is Pepper said like that, right? And what he insisted.
Well, basically, he says, okay, there's a different way, there's a different approach in science, and he implied that if you really want to be a true scientist, you should try to disprove your theories instead of finding confirmation for the things that you believe.
What?
if in order to get closer to the truth, you should not. It is better to find data or to find proof that will reject your theories than to go out and find information that is in support of what you're already thinking.
Or you mean you believe issues something you believe, but the data will not prove that you believe.
Right.
Then you need to looking for another data.
So you actually should look for evidence, for data, for phenomena that will basically turn your theory upside down.
Your theory upside down.
Right.
Oh.
So basically, in order to get closer to the truth, you can try to find more evidence in support of your theory. Like the example of Santa Claus, there are a lot of examples. There's a lot of examples. There's a lot of data available that support the existence of Santa Claus. That's you see Santa Claus in the mall. You get presents under the tree. There's a lot of songs about Santa Claus on the radio, etc., etc. That is one way of proving that Santa Claus exists. But if you really wanted to test your theory whether Santa Claus exists, you should not look for more evidence that Santa Claus exists. You should try to disprove that Santa Claus exists. That means that you have to wake up in the middle of the night and try to catch Santa Claus putting the gifts in your shoes, and then lo and behold, you will find that actually your father put the gifts in your shoes, and therefore you can now start to challenge your theory that Santa Claus exists. Maybe Santa Claus doesn't exist. Maybe it's a conspiracy. Maybe it was your father.
So why this video is explaining Freud and Einstein? I don't still understand what's the difference among those.
Why did I? Well, basically, the Popper has put. Popper is being taught in universities. Like, okay, I also in my first year at university I was taught about Popper. And why is it important? Because it is something that we learn that if we are going to engage in science, if we are going to get a better understanding of the truth, then we should actually challenge our beliefs, and we should, instead of just looking for support of the things that we already believe in, if we want to get closer to the truth, we should aim to falsify and find evidence for things that would disprove our theory, and thereby coming closer to the truth. I think this is a courageous approach. It's a more courageous approach, trying to find yourself wrong, but it's also a much more effective approach in coming closer to the truth. So when we are debating, when we are discussing, when we are engaging in negotiation, we can say, okay, we want to have this contract work, and later on we will figure out how exactly it's going to work out. That is, especially in the eyes of Popper, and what we learn in university, is something that is not in line with Western culture. We are taught to challenge, we are taught to disprove, we are taught to put things out in the open, force each other to say yes or no instead of maybe. And say and create a model and discuss the model and challenge the model in order to get a better understanding where both sides are, and by engaging in this exchange becomes more and more clear how both sides feel, and both sides understand how they feel and how the other side feels, and thereby come to a better understanding and hopefully a better solution.
It means